My name's Ilona Parkinson and I've got pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy, and that is, in easier terms, a lack of the vitamin B6 in my body. I realised something was wrong when I was about 8 years old and I had some sensory issues. So I was out one day playing in the playground and I lost my vision, which, being 8's quite scary if you're by yourself because everyone's playing tag. So that was the start of things happening about once a year. So I grew up, began to have some more seizures from there, but not always the typical seizure you think of where you're shaking. I had things like, as I say, my sensory went, my eyesight could go, and I could hear certain sounds, not voices, but like a booming noise. Those are the main things I had initially. Yeah, my symptoms get really bad because they could be from physical seizures which people recognise, to shaking, to being wearing an eye mask because I can't see sunlight or my phone. Anything would trigger me off. From there I ending up in hospital because I had lots of seizures where I was physically shaking, tonic-clonics, and interstatus. So I had to be intubated with a tracheostomy. Because over the last few years I spent 231 days in the hospital. I was in intensive care for about 121, I'd say. I wasn't conscious when I was in intensive care. That was a lot more severe, asleep in a coma, so that my brain stayed healthy and active.
We requested exome sequencing on Ilona really because we had tried every single gene we could possibly think of that was available to be done singly, that could possibly account for the difficult situation that she was in. And really we were in a situation where if we couldn't get to the bottom of why Ilona was having the recurrent status, she was in a very precarious situation in terms of her survival. It was really, we try this as the last thing that we've got to offer.
I've been involved in the clinical exome service development project that's been running locally, and Ilona's case was referred to the project to see whether we could find a molecular diagnosis for her. It was on one Friday evening that I was looking through the notes and looking for aspects of her history that might influence which panels we would apply, and it was at that stage of applying the panels that we found some variants in one particular gene that was of interest, and that's in a gene that causes a condition called pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy. And whilst Ilona's history was potentially within the spectrum of that condition, it certainly wasn't typical for it. But the key was that this was effectively a treatable condition, a condition that can be managed with vitamin B6. And because Ilona had had such a troubled recent history with multiple admissions to ITU, I was concerned that actually this was something that perhaps we should disseminate sooner rather than later, even though it wasn't a confirmed diagnosis.
So as soon as we strongly suspected that this genetic change was going to be the answer for Ilona's problems, it didn't seem right to wait for all the further laboratory confirmations in that potentially we had a cure for her. And she started the B6 pretty well straight away. Within 48 hours she was a transformed person, so she was alive, awake, and her old personality, I assume, was coming through. I'd never met her before the status epilepticus, and I think she was a transformed person very rapidly. She has since that time made enormous strides forward, and I think as time has moved on and more of the strong anticonvulsants she was having to take to keep her out of status epilepticus have been weaned off, I think she has felt more and more alive and better in herself.
Having that level of sequence detail about someone's genome can have a huge impact because it allows us to understand, for some patients, disorders that we've never been able to understand before. And in other instances, it means that we can diagnose conditions that we could never diagnose before. What we mean by an exome is that you just take the bits of the genome that are active, that we call genes. So, you know, when you watch a football match, you watch the whole football match. Well, looking at an exome is a bit like looking at the highlights. And so that's why sometimes you go for the highlights. And in the past, it's been much cheaper to do that than to try and do the whole genome. But this project, the 100,000 Genomes project, is seeing so many patients and taking people from around the whole of the country so that that sort of level of testing, we're getting the prices down so that a genome is possible. We're still at the point when a lot of doctors and nurses don't quite realise how important the genome could be to the health of individuals. And sometimes it's not being clear that something is genetic because there's no family history. The thing that it can do that nothing else sometimes can do is try and get to the heart of what is the problem. And so for so long as doctors and healthcare workers, we are taken over by the symptoms, and sometimes we're treating the symptoms without actually understanding what the cause of the problem is. So what a genome can do is pinpoint the exact way in which, perhaps at a cellular level, perhaps more at a tissue level, things have gone wrong. And then you can start targeting your treatment that treats the underlying cause as opposed to the symptoms. And I think that that's the fundamental difference. So I think it's going to change pathology, it's going to change the way that we classify disorders, and hopefully it's going to give us a much better way of targeting better treatment to the right people.
It's meant so much, it's been life-changing. That sounds so cheesy, but it kicked in. I'd begun to notice when I got back from a short bit of travel that I could actually begin doing things again, and I wasn't worried. It's not I have to take this on me in case something goes wrong. I could go out without a ton of drugs in my bag, medication. I started my vitamin in September, B6, and it's now February. So I'd say it was working effectively. It is. I don't know, with like the genetics, you kind of think, oh, it could work. But you always kind of, in your head, having been through so much, you think, don't put your hopes up, don't expect it to. And then when something actually came back, it changes everything again. For everyone that looked after me, I don't really have the words to give to them because obviously I'd say thank you, but they did so much for me. They made sure I'm still able to do things now, my brain's healthy. They spoke to me and treated me as though things were okay, and they supported me. Not only did they, in hospital, my health was looked after, but so was my emotions. I can't really explain it. People would like change your life. They don't just save it, but they mean you can continue living.